Welcome to the Friends with Money podcast, brought to you by Money Magazine, creating financial freedom for Australians since 1999.
Today I'm talking to mathematician, raconteur and author Adam Spencer about his new book, Maths 101. So were you inspired by lockdown and parents having to homeschool?
That reinforced the need for it. The actual idea for the book originally came from a friend of mine who I won't name, but Ollie texted me one day and he said, Adam, he said, mate, Teddy, 7, has just asked me, Dad, why isn't 1 a prime number? I've locked myself in the bathroom. I can't stall him much longer. Please help. And so I texted my mate back and, yeah, look, explain to him this, that. And he sent a message back a few minutes later going, oh, thanks so much, mate. You got me out of a real bind there. And this mate of mine's a very intelligent man. It's just a long time since he's done. And that's not even a real core curriculum question in primary school, but it's the sort of question some kids will ask. So half my book is, here's how you add fractions together and why. Do it with a block of chocolate. See that a third is the same as 3/6, blah, blah. But some of it is just those sort of questions that a curious young mind will ask you. What's infinity plus 10? Is 1 a prime number or not? Is 0.999999 going on forever? Dad, is that really equal to 1 or not? That sends shivers of fear down the backs of a lot of parents. I understand that. And so that's where the book comes in.
And when it comes to just general maths that they teach in primary schools, has it changed the way they teach it? If you remember, what you did 20 years ago, will it be the same as it is now?
It's a really good question. Look, there are a couple of things that have changed slightly, but in the mind of parents who think, I just can't teach this to my kids, it's all changed since we've done it. What they're perceiving as the degree of change is significantly more than what's gone on. There's a couple of new things thrown in and there's a couple of new approaches to things thrown in, but they're, with the greatest of respect to parents who are struggling with it, it's 4th grade maths. So if you take a bit of time, you'll get it. But what people perceive, for example, remember the old long division, we used to put the curl there and the line across the top and bang? They've changed the algorithm for that in a purely cosmetic way. So my book's got great examples of, here's the way you did it, here's the way they do it now. This 7 is exactly the same as that 7. We've just written it in a slightly different place. So a lot of what seems to be big change is nowhere near as significant as it seems. But again, and the philosophy of this book for me really is for parents who want to do it, you can just go on the journey with kids all the way through the primary school. You don't have to wait till they come to you going, I don't understand something, can you help? This book is just as much for parents who want to keep on top or their kids to go ahead a bit as it is problem solving once the challenges arise.
Have you had to do your own revision to see what they're doing at schools now?
Yeah, so I teamed up with a woman who's a curriculum guru, and so we walked through what and where. It's really interesting that the full official curriculum books of this age group, just year 3 through to year 6, ran to almost 2,000 pages. Mm-hmm. A lot of it being exercises and revision and examples. But it was, if you'd stack those books next to each other and they were sort of A4 sized books, they would have run 12, 15 centimetres wide. Now that's not wall-to-wall dense theory. The course isn't that big, but just to do things and to practice and to drum it in and to get used to the language of it all, there's a lot to cover there. Most of what I recalled being on the syllabus was correct, but I certainly didn't know if you were meant to do that in 3rd grade or 4th, or some things that I thought were probably primary school turn out they're not till year 8. So I might have pushed my daughters a little bit hard.
Always a good thing. I noticed the other day you put some on LinkedIn, and when I saw how other people worked it out, I thought, oh, that's interesting. That's actually not how I would have worked it out, and it made me think about, how different people see it and, whether there's a right or a wrong, I guess.
It's a really good question. I mean, there are some ways where there's clearly a best way to do things, but there's a lot of mathematics, even at the primary school level, certainly at the high school level. I could ask you a question and you could think, okay, well, I could just put in lots of different numbers and see which ones work. That's called trial and error. There's nothing wrong with that. And that sometimes really illuminates a potential path forward. Maybe with exactly the same example, you could draw an appropriate diagram and work out something about it. So you might be taking an almost geometric approach, or you might be resolving it in terms of algebra. Now, 3 different ways to solve. And the really interesting analogy there is when you get to the much higher levels of mathematics, the things that university professors are pushing at the very edges of knowledge about, sometimes the really great observations come from someone, because by the time you get to that level of mathematics, if you're really good at, let's say, geometry, and I'm really good at algebra, we might not have that much in common to talk about. We might not have real strengths in each other's areas. The brilliant mathematicians, there's a guy called Terence Tao, T-A-O, an Aussie living in the States, who's regularly mentioned in discussions around who's the greatest living mathematician. He's right up there. Part of his genius is you can come to me with a problem, someone else comes to me with a completely different problem, and Tao can look at it and go, you know what? I think you people might be working on the same thing in some ways. I think yours is the geometry version of this woman's algebra problem. Why don't you guys chat? Maybe there's some of the great breakthroughs in mathematics come from people taking a problem, looking at it upside down and spun around slightly and realizing, hold it, that's actually something we already know. So that deep understanding is quite beautiful. But even back in primary school, there's often multiple ways to skin a mathematical cat.
How did you become interested in deciding that maths was your life?
From the youngest of ages, I loved it. It just made sense to me. And I can remember my mates in primary school, who would probably look back and go, Adam was just a maths genius. I can guarantee you Adam did a lot more maths than they did because he loved it. Now, I probably had a degree of insight. I probably picked it up fairly quickly. But I then reinforced it with I've talked about this before, but one of the breakthrough moments for me was a teacher I had in year 2, Ms. Russell, who I was not at a school where they had accelerated programs and year 2 kids couldn't go off to do year 4 maths in the afternoon and there was nowhere to stay back or anything like that. And she realised I wasn't trying to be difficult. I was just getting really bored. Ms. Russell came up to me one day at lunchtime and said, Adam, look, after lunch, we're going to do these 10 questions in the book. There's actually 50 questions in the chapter. We're going to try and do the first 10. I bet if instead of coming back to class, if you went off to the library, I bet you wouldn't be able to do all 50 questions in the time it takes us to do 10. And as I sit here, I can still remember running down the corridor to the library after lunch because I was going to show Ms. Russell I could do 50 questions in the time. And she had this beautiful insight of I didn't hunger to do university mathematics when I was 8 or anything. I just needed more examples. I just wanted to do, and we do this regularly. And I'd come back into class, and they'd be halfway through question 9 or 10, and I'd sit quietly up the back. Then I'd bring up there and go, "I did all 50, miss. Don't have to worry. I've checked them all twice. They're all correct. Gee, I think there's a misprint in question 37 in the book, or what." And I wasn't being a dick, and I wasn't lording. I don't recall lording over everyone else. Oh, how smart! I just loved it. And so I'm sure you encounter in every endeavour, you encounter these once in a generation geniuses and that sort of stuff. But the stories kids remember of their mate who just picked up a guitar and instantly was just ripping, shredding leads. No. And even if they somehow made a noise thing, totally. I can still remember a music lesson where Tom Burge, a mate of mine, when we were all being shown how to try and blow into a trumpet and all that. And that's how he did put it to his mouth and it made a sound. That was luck more than anything, I'm sure. He then became the school trumpet player, and everyone. He's now a professional trombonist in the United States. But it's not like he didn't just pick it up and he was suddenly, Louis Armstrong or what. He did hours of work because he loved it so much.
And do you see there's other things that you're strong at because your mind works in that mathematical way? Like often people say that music and maths is connected in the way of thinking.
Yeah, look, the music maths link is an interesting one. I think in terms of composition and musicology, yeah, it probably is there. If this is a note, then that's a fifth and that's a seventh. And structuring chords and all that makes sense. But I taught myself to play the guitar once and I can hold chords and nothing special. That was purely hard work and muscle memory. And there's a lot of brilliant guitarists out there who could not do first-year university mathematics. I think people tend to overstate and simplify that link a little bit. I certainly see the world mathematically, and sometimes that's a strength and sometimes that's a weakness. I'm good at planning things and structuring, going, well, let's do it this way, let's do it that way. I'm far too obsessive with things, and I sweat over whether there's a more efficient or perfect way to do something when other people are just going, mate, it's not going to minute. My fiance, I'm getting married in a couple of months, met a life-changingly wonderful woman. And she said to me something, thank you. She said to me something the other day, which was so true. I was stressing, we were meant to be doing something, and one of our combined 4 kids was a little bit late, and so the plan was sort of falling apart, and I was stressing out a bit. And she said, what I don't understand about you is you can walk out in front of 2,500 people hosting an event that deep down you know is not ready to go and is held together. This thing might not work. They're really disorganized. And you will walk out calm as you like and just swim with that. My son isn't sure if he's going to make the bus this afternoon, and you're freaking out like it's Apollo 13 and you don't know if the astronauts are going to get back in time. Adam, your ability to sweat the small stuff when it's not going perfectly the way you want. So it's a blessing and a curse, that way of seeing the world as algorithms and as processes and like if I'm the one who'll be going, well, hold it. But if we dropped her at school while you were at the shops, I could then go and pick him up. As long as she got out in time and we missed the school zone, I could and my fiancé would be saying, or we could just go to the shops,
And so do you think the other bit where you go out and you talk to a couple of thousand people, that's because you're not organising it and you can let go a bit?
I'm lucky in that the one thing that is a little bit different about me that runs against the generalisation, and a lot of you pretty solid mathematical people aren't as good verbally, for example.
Yeah, right.
And I should clarify all this in terms of my mathematical skills, Julia. Like, as I put it, in a room of randomly selected people, I'm a maths genius. In a room of maths PhDs, I'm as dumb as a box of hammers, right? I'm not an elite mathematician by any stretch of the imagination. I'm really good at putting into words and metaphors how mathematics works and what really good mathematicians are doing. And so in that sense, but even for me, a lot of the time, the way I remember, if I'm delivering at an event, the way I remember the way the pieces fit together, I see that very sort of jigsaw piece algorithm, like we have to do this, then that. Then once we've done that, well, of course we can do that session then, and that'll bring us that to that. Then we'll finish off with it. So I do tend to sort of construct things, geometrically, algebraically in my mind, certainly. And then again, I'll get distracted halfway through because someone's slide will have a number that's a really cool prime number, and I'll be there just remembering facts about it, and I'm suddenly meant to run out on stage.
What's the best money advice you've ever received?
So here's a generalisation for you. Most people would think, oh, you're really good at maths, you'd be awesome at money. Those two, I don't think those two necessarily go together at all. There are certain things where I can calculate, okay, if we need a 30% deposit or whatever, and I can keep track of if I'm earning this much and that. But in terms of natural sense with money, I don't have much at all. I've made some disastrous choices along the journey in terms of money that when you look back logically, you think, dude, you would have thought someone who was doing a PhD in pure mathematics would have thought about that a little bit more. And my parents never sat down and talked about money with me. In some ways, I wish they had a bit more. And with my own daughters, I'm starting to have those sort of conversations. I was at an event, I was hosting an event where Chris Caton, when he was still the chief economist at Bankers Trust, I think he was then, back in the early 2000s, and when things were rolling along towards what eventually became the GFC. And Chris on stage, when he was doing a Q&A with the audience, said, and I think the phrase was, don't mistake a cycle for a trend. If something's going in one direction, the heat will eventually come out of that and it will eventually go down. Don't think that's just an eternal upward climb. In the perfect world, I would have listened a little bit closer to that and understood more what he meant at the time, because I took a large amount of, what at the time for me was a large amount of money, and made my first foray into the stock market about 18 seconds before the GFC hit, from what I recall.
So what's the best investment decision you've made?
Best investment decision I made? I got into Bitcoin when it was at about 0.004 cents. No. I'm lucky with the work that I do, because outside of the media, I do I'm basically a professional conference MC, do a lot of hosting of events these days. And so I've been exposed to the work of people who really understand that area. And through my work at the Sydney Swans, Andrew Pridham, who's the chair of the Swans, ran Moelis Capital in Australia, now renamed MA Financial. So I've been in a position where when I do have a little bit of money, I've been able to go to people who know far more about it than me and say, here you go, have that. And so the way I understand the concept of diversity and not exposing yourself just to one asset class, because if that turns, you can lose everything. So I've been lucky enough every time I do get enough of a minimum investment nest egg. So I'm into about 5 or 6 or 7 different little boutique projects that those guys are doing, one of which is commercial real estate, one of which is hospitality, one of which is aged care, etc., that sort of spreads things out and exposes them sufficiently broadly that I'm presuming I'm as insulated as I could hope to be as someone who doesn't understand or wouldn't regularly. So the best decision I've made is to access good quality knowledge that I have an unfair advantage being exposed to, and not being arrogant enough to go, well, look, I probably know as much as you do, Mr. Lifetime professional fund managing investment guy. No, I don't. I'm an idiot. Here's my money. Please do smart things with it.
So what's the worst investment decision you've made?
I locked in interest rates were up around 7.5%. And I locked in the interest rates on my home, fearing they were going to get bigger and bigger. And I really didn't understand the concept. Just someone else, I'd heard a mate of mine had locked in some interest rates. So I thought, I'll do that. And I really didn't sit down and talk to people about what that involved and how it worked. And I ended up the person who did it for me, it didn't, it's my fault that I made the decision I did. But certainly when I said, well, why don't we just lock the whole thing in for the longest term possible, it would have been reasonable for them to say, look, you might not want to do that. And I locked in a big home loan for 5 years at like 7.8% weeks before the GFC. And, before I even realised what had happened, interest rates had plummeted to nothing, and the government was underwriting banks to keep those interest rates low to make sure no one collapsed, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And it cost me almost $100,000 to break that lock-in and reposition it. And that was my own stupid fault on many levels. I'd gone into something I didn't really understand, didn't take multiple sources of advice before doing it, just wanted to get it done nice and quickly, and really ended up paying a significant price for it. I mean, it was a bit unlucky.
The GFC coming. That is unlucky, I think.
Oh, yeah. A few people saw the GFC coming such that if I'd asked enough people, some of them would have said to me, well, mate, I wouldn't put it all in for 5 years, maybe lock half of it away for 3 years or something like that. And I could have worn that, and that would have been a bit bad luck with the GFC. But I walked up to the GFC presenting my chin going, go on, how hard do you think you can punch me? And it turns out it had been eating its Wheat Bix that day.
I just think that, the banks are always going to price everything in to suit them. You're never going to get the best deal. So
no, you're not. But it's also in hindsight. I mean, at the moment there'd be a case for locking away your entire home loan for 5 years if you're happy at 3% or whatever, and conceivably could be more. But when it's 7.8 and you're worried it's going to go up to 9, now that's a situation where basic mathematics tells you not to do that. But the basic mathematics, which I have, was not paired with the common sense or the lack of hubris to ask other people what I should do.
What's your favourite thing to splurge on?
My fiance.
Oh, I'm going to tell my partner that.
Yeah, no, at the moment it would be. I'm really, really happy with a wonderful, beautiful person who's changed my life a lot for the better. My guilty, until a few years ago, my really guilty pleasure, as in just wasting money on it, would have been chess books on how to play. I would have a library of chess books, the percentage of which I've actually opened and read and got anything out of is just embarrassingly. Like if you buy a chess book and you never read it, okay. If you buy a second or third one, I must have close to 100. And I've never gleaned anywhere near a percentage of the stuff that's in them. And I'm not actually at a level of play where I could with half the books I own. I'd see them and thought, that's a pretty cover. If I just sort of leave that on the shelf there, by osmosis, I might be a grand master next week. Turns out that's not the way it goes.
If you had $10,000 right now, where would you invest it?
I'd be lucky enough to ask a couple of people I know. I'd spread it round a bit. It's really interesting. There's always going to be doomsayers in the market and that sort of stuff, but the conversations around the amount of cheap money that's been pumped into equities internationally is fascinating. And there were countries where a lot of recovery money and things like that just went at a young, investment bros in the United States through gamified things like Robinhood and that sort of stuff. And I hear the fears that there could be a lot of money pumping around there that could, have overpriced things. If you wanted to have a little bit of a flutter in a cryptocurrency, I'm not going to tell you not to, but you would only do that if it was money you could completely afford to wake up tomorrow and realize had gone to zero. And two, I'd suggest if you were willing to take $1,000 and buy some Ethereum, and I should disclose I own a small amount of a couple of cryptos, you're only buying that if you genuinely, the best thing you could do is buy it, write down your password and all that to the app, and then disable that app on your phone and not look for 10 years. And if you come back and it's gone up 100 times in value, lucky you. If you come back and it turns out for 8.5 years it's been worth zero, well, you should have known that was a real chance. But I think that's the way to play in that space.
What would you do if you only had $50 left in the bank?
I would bet it all on the Sydney Swans winning the 2022 AFL Grand Final.
Wow. Do you intend to leave an inheritance?
Yes. Yeah. I intend to make sure my kids are all right, but also there's been a few different charitable organisations I've worked with and other institutions and things that have helped, make me the person that I am. And I'd be keen to give a little bit back to some of them. Yeah.
What's been your best money-making career move?
Best money-making career move. Well, it's interesting because the sort of things that I make my money off these days are skills that I had no idea at the time when I was picking them up worked towards what I'm doing now. So when I was loving mathematics at university, I never had any idea I was going to go into a media career, let alone into a corporate MC hosting career that would skew towards tech and where understanding a bit of the mathematics behind it, but also being able to take the piss out of yourself as being a nerdy mathematician would be such a strong part of, the way I brand myself and the way I work. And similarly, when I was at university, I went to a few world debating championships and I played improv theatre. And when you're belting around doing improv theatre at uni at Manning Bar in front of 800 kids who've had a beer at lunchtime and you're cracking some funny but slightly, ribald jokes on stage, there's no part of you thinking this speed of decision making and this confidence in projecting myself and this having half an idea and just going with it and knowing that it's going to land somewhere good. Gee, this will really help me out. Yesterday I was emceeing a panel with 5 experts, including Peter Doherty, the former Nobel Prize winner for medicine, about immunotherapy and the breakthroughs we've had in those fields. It's fair to say, compared to the other 5 people in the panel I was conducting, like you would be well less than 1% when you're comparing my knowledge of that subject matter to them. But I've been involved in enough conversations and I've soaked up a tiny bit of the material, but I can just feel the flow of a conversation and move it around so that everyone gets involved, throw in a joke when it's right, leave someone some space, sense when someone's going on a little bit too long and just gently bring them back. And no idea. I don't even remember specifically where I picked those skills up. So the crucial money-making skills I have these days, I didn't even realize when I was investing in them. But that sort of being confident and presenting and backing yourself is probably the greatest skill I've picked up along the journey, and certainly the one that there's least official accreditation or anything for, but has given me the most back.
And I suppose it's not one of those things that as you're doing it, your parents are saying, oh, yeah, that's really going to be good for your future.
One of the things I was really lucky with, one thing, Julia, that my mum and dad, so my mum left school in primary school. She didn't even get to high school. My dad dropped out of school in year 9 because he got bad asthma and couldn't do all the steroid treatments and that sort of stuff, and went off into his job. And the 2 smart people who could have, education could have changed their lives, didn't even, complete year 9 between the two of them. I'm the first person in my family to go to uni ever, etc. And I did not have a linear career path once I got to uni. I was all over the shop, started a law degree, finished, no, dropped out, did law, did mathematics, boom, president of the student union, took a year off, thought I'd start a PhD, didn't work out, won a comedy competition, boom, boom. My mum and dad were always supportive and backed that I was not being an idiot and knew what might work out. And I'm really lucky that I didn't have the hardcore helicoptering. Well, you haven't come forward in a straight line from 6 months ago, so what's going on types, because that wouldn't have worked for me at all. Now, there are some kids for whom actually that's what they need their parents to do. And I'm starting to realise with my two daughters, who I love to death, but are quite different in some ways, in the ways they go about education and all, the way they see themselves progressing in life. The skill of realising that people are different and working out which course for which horse is, oh dear, not easy. Not easy.
Last question for you. Can you finish the sentence, money makes ...
Between 5 and 8% per annum if invested really wisely. Be scary if someone's offering you much more than that. Or ... its way into my bank account every time someone buys a copy of Maths 101 by Adam Spencer. Available in all good bookstores.
You have been listening to Adam Spencer today on Friends with Money. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to your favourite podcasts.
Thanks for listening to the Friends with Money podcast. For credible, independent and easy to understand financial commentary, visit moneymag.com.au. Please remember that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are general in nature, and further independent advice and research based on your personal circumstances should be sought before making an investment decision.